Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Pakistan stands unified against what of course we've seen as a false flag operation, and of course those that died in Pahalgam. Our hearts go out to them. We'll be talking about the ramifications of what is certainly escalation that we've seen from the Indian side, the role of the media, the irresponsibility as far as Indian media is concerned. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the past as far as the actions of course, India in this irresponsible way that we've seen, and also what it means for the future of two states like Pakistan and India, both nuclear states, and whether, of course, the kind of comments, the kind of reaction that we've seen, which of course shows a kind of staged operation that has been seen as far as Pahalgam is concerned, and what we can expect. Of course, we'll also be talking about the Indus Water Treaty, and as far as things that have unfolded in the wake of the irresponsible action by India have shown a flagrant disregard for overall any kind of conventions, any kind of international law, any kind of law that could have been followed, any kind of restraint that could have been shown. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me AVM retired IJAZ Malik. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us FARZANA YAQOOB, who is former Minister for Social Welfare, Azad Jammu Kashmir. Thank you for joining us today. And MUNEEB QADIR, who is a lawyer and legal expert. Thank you for being with us today. Before I go on and talk more as to what and how it's being played as far as India is concerned, the irresponsible manner, the disregard for any convention, I want to go to a little bit of the background with MUNEEB. MUNEEB, we've also at this time, the way that things are happening around the world, if we look at Palestine, if we look at what is happening in Kashmir also, and has consistently happened, we've also our attention is inadvertently drawn to the futility of perhaps I have to say as lawyers, to any kind of international conventions, any kind of rules, any kind of law, international law at all, because what really seems to be happening is in fact very simply might is right. First of all, would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with it, and I think that in the past 2 to 3 years, I've just seen the worst in humanity. I mean, the wave of intolerance and global rise of far-right extremism, it's brought out the worst in humanity, and that is happening all across the globe. And in this context, then, when we see that in South Asia as well, this whole pandemic of far-right aggression takes over, it does get worrisome. Particularly, you've just referenced, the situation in Middle East, what's been going on in Gaza. And so many civilians are in the line of fire. Even schools are not safe anymore. Hospitals are not safe. Refugee shelters are not safe. Similarly, the Ukraine-Russia dynamics. In the midst of all of this, now we're also seeing that the extremely alarming Pahalgam incident, which has just happened in Indian occupied Kashmir. And, on a human level, you can so relate to it and just shudder at the thought of how vulnerable those tourists must have felt when they were confronted with the extremists, with the terrorists. And this was the time for leaders, no less, the leaders of a country which prides itself in calling itself a secular democracy, to sit and think and draw up a new strategy of ensuring that those living in Kashmir get their rights to self-determination in accordance with international law, and at the same time that the ashes and this fire which is engulfing, this fire of hate which is engulfing the whole world, it's minimized and there should be de-escalation. Instead, what they resorted to was jingoism. What they've been resorting to is glorification of war. And yes, you're absolutely right. This might is right culture, this impunity, I think this is what is becoming the new norm, the new international legal norm, impunity. And this is not what we had wanted, certainly not in a post-World War II era, when the United Nations was created with the vision, when a Universal Declaration of Human Rights came about in 1948, to have a world order
When
which
we
was
talk
a
about,
human.
I'm going to interject here. When we talk, I want to go to other guests also, but when we talk about the Indus Water Treaty and the way, the actions of India over, the way that they've decided to just, halt and stop and at their own behest. Certainly there are international conventions, certainly there are organizations, certainly. How do you look at this in the wake of all of that, and what does it show? Because this is a nation that is, that is certainly putting out their own narrative, their own version of what happened in Pahalgam, and also their own citizens and their own people are not corroborating it, and they are themselves negating what the Indian state in fact is putting out there. That is what's interesting as far as this is concerned, one of those things. But it also shows the futility of any of these in international conventions then, right?
It's extremely unfortunate that we are not seeing a rules-based global order anymore. And this sense of impunity, the fact that today we don't have a global environment which is conducive to human rights, and that is exactly what populists like Narendra Modi and their BJP government are taking advantage of. And so, with regards to Indus Water Treaty, let me just be very clear. Even though international law is not being followed, we're seeing aggressive rhetoric, not just from India, but we're seeing that happen worldwide as well. We must remember that we have to judge their conduct as well as our own conduct by reference to international law. And so let me make it very clear if there were any doubts about it. Indian government and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs suggesting or stating that they are going to hold the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, or that they are going to suspend the Indus Water Treaty, they should know, and we should also know, that this is going to be completely unjustified under international law. Why? Because Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969, it's not just binding on its member states, but it's also binding as a matter of customary international law, and particularly the more discerning section of your audiences. I would like to draw the mind towards Articles 59 to 62 of the Vienna Convention, which categorically state that you cannot unilaterally suspend a treaty, and the only situations in which you can suspend treaties are where there is a material breach of a treaty, which clearly Pakistan has not committed in this case, or if there is a fundamental change of circumstances, which certainly has not happened at all, or if there is a supervening impossibility of performance of your treaty obligations, which India has no pretext of claiming that the events which have taken place have frustrated the agreement that had taken place between India and Pakistan. So this is wholly illegal, and this is certainly not the flex that the Indian administration thinks that it is. It is actually shameful.
Back to you, Muneeb. I have with me IJAZ. IJAZ, thank you for your patience. As far as overall the situation at this time is concerned, how are you looking at things? Because this is not, this is not the first time that India has acted extremely irresponsibly. I believe irresponsible is a very small word, and it doesn't really, the kind of actions that have been taken, and after that, the kind of narrative that is being put forward, the inflammatory content that is being put forward by the Indian side is right there. How do you look at things at this time?
Obviously, it reflects the mindset of the Indian, politicians, the government, and even the other, responsible people like the media persons. So, in entirety, if we see, it's sheer irresponsible attitude. I mean, this is there are two nations, nuclear armed nations, who have very 70 years plus old conflict, which is unresolved as per the United Nations Security Council resolutions, or even if they, so to say, they say that now after 72 it's a bilateral issue, but it has to be resolved as per the aspirations of the people of Kashmir. So that remains a flashpoint. So in this background.
But as far as these false flag operations are concerned, we do, India, as far as India is concerned, it has a history of them.
Exactly.
And there are cases in point for it, which the world has also seen.
So if you, as you are just touching upon their history, let's say starting from 2000, once the State Assembly attack was managed by Indians, and then we had an eyeball to eyeball, standoff for about a year plus, which ultimately India has to step back. And that was because of the economic losses they were suffering because of the blockade in the sea and the closure of airspace, plus the expenditure over the massive deployment of the armed forces, which in case of India were much higher than that of Pakistan. So that forced India to ultimately withdraw.
Right.
And after that, there have been instances again. So what are these similarities? There are certain, internal or domestic objectives, that there are certain issues inside India that the government thinks that to divert the attention of their own populace, they need some, flashpoint or some hype on certain issues of security, one.
And
second,
of course, these loss of these lives don't mean anything to
exactly.
them in the wake
And
of.
secondly, whenever they think in their reckoning that there is something which is happening which needs them to have an international, inclination towards India, or there is some opportunity for Pakistan as regard to, its Pakistan's relevance in the regional and global politics, or Pakistan has, some kind of opportunity for them to undertake such malicious campaign. So this time, if we see where we stand, Pakistan has started a process, and Pakistan is at an advanced stage of for its economic revival, economic stability. And then the new administration in White House, they gave an indication that probably they would need Pakistan's support, or at least it was gleaned through the statement of President Trump. So
basically an attempt to destabilize what they perceive as, Pakistan's stability at this time, and of course, going towards the kind of economic progress that
exactly.
Right. Let me go to Farzana on this. Farzana, can you hear me? Farzana?
Hello, can you hear me?
Ji, I can hear you. Farzana, we're talking about the context in which, as far as this irresponsibility is concerned, as far as, this disregard for any kind of rational behavior is concerned, as far as India is concerned, in terms of now, the role of media also, do you think that there is a realization in India at this time that they need to perhaps step back, and that de-escalation has to be made, because of course, us being two nuclear states, and the situation that, because of its own hasty actions, it finds itself in?
Not at all. India has been portraying itself as a self-proclaimed superpower. Indian media particularly plays out this role very, very well. Be it the news channels, be it their movies, what they portray to their people is that India is this amazing nation and they are great people. Now, in this narrative that they have created, that they are the best, this is the only nation where Hindus live freely, and this is not a place for anyone other than Hindus. What they do is that whenever anything happens, the first thing that they do is that they blame Pakistan. And this has to be seen that every time any kind of terrorist activity takes place, it is instantaneously blamed on Pakistan. So this obsession of India is very much with Pakistan. On the other side, when we look at Pakistani media has zero obsession with India. And we don't see this constant discussion as to, how bad India is and how bad Indians are. Every now and then, when they attack Pakistan, when they abuse Kashmiris, when they go against Kashmiris, it is only then that India is even mentioned. Second part is that India, whenever India has gone into elections, it riles people up by mentioning anti-Pakistan narrative. This is not the first time. We've seen this has happened in Pulwama. This has been happening continuously. It is very strange, and people must question that how come within the presence of 900,000 plus army personnel in Indian occupied Kashmir, where they are regularly cordoning, they are taking away Kashmiris' lands and homes, and they are cordoning villages to find even one or two freedom fighters. While they are being so strict with the freedom fighters, apparently someone has just come up and they have freely killed tourists. Kashmiris are known to be very, very welcoming. We do not attack tourists. Another thing that has to be mentioned as well is that the place where this incident has taken place, the locals have been...
No, overall, that's what I want to come to. As far as this, the locals within the area, Indian nationals themselves are not corroborating the version that the Indian state is putting forward, the narrative that they are putting forward.
Yes,
isn't that a fact also?
It is, and they themselves are coming up on the social media and declaring themselves alive. Well, one of the photos which went very viral was of a man. Sadly, he's dead, and his wife is sitting right next to him. And after one day, we find out that this is an Indian Army, probably Navy personnel, and him and his wife has made a video declaring themselves alive. So the question is, one, this place where this attack took place was very close to one of the Indian Army bases, right? Two, the kind of media that you see picture-perfect photographs. That does not happen when something has happened indigenously or if it were actually a real terror attack. Everything seems to be really well coordinated. And for Modi to rush back from Saudi Arabia because this is apparently a big threat to their democracy, these are all very clear signs of a false flag event that has been created to once again, point fingers at Pakistan, because things seem to be improving. Not only seem to be improving, but actually they are improving. And so it is, India has as usual come up with a false flag, and as I said before, this is not the first time. As for the Indus Water Treaty, the Pakistan's foreign minister has said that the demarche that the foreign ministry has received, nowhere does it mention the abrogation or India stepping away from Indus Water Treaty. The number of personnel has been decreased. The number of people in embassies are also...
As far as the situation at this time is concerned, of course, the way that India is acting, their irrationality, irresponsibility at this time, on one side, isn't it also a fact that it is time, that India perceives this in context of two nuclear states, and the fact that, we as states need to act more responsibly. There needs to be more rational behavior. There needs to be a toning down, and that cannot be emphasized enough. Even after that, they've taken this kind of hasty action, irresponsible action against any kind of international law conventions.
India has no, plan of toning down anything. Just an hour ago, we were receiving news that India, which was apparently super red alert, was going on at the moment, and their Air Force has bombed their own civilian area. So India does not tone down. India can only be beaten down. There is no way that India, in presence of Modi, will ever act sanely. Modi is not known to be sane. This Prime Minister is a butcher of Gujarat. He has butchered people to achieve...
The way that his irresponsibility overall has made an Indian state an extremely difficult region for any and all nations, as far as Muslims are concerned, the minorities overall. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to be taking a short break for, of course, some breaking news, and then we'll come back and talk more about the kind of reaction that we've seen, the kind of action that we've seen as far as India is concerned. Please stay with us. Right, welcome back. Let me go to Muneeb on this. Muneeb, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
As you know, legally speaking, of course, you know, the effectiveness, and I think, let me ask you, is limited as far as any legal measures that can be taken in terms of, you know, the way the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty, and also, you know, as far as de-escalation is concerned, the role of international peacekeeping organizations also seems limited. Are there legal consequences of this at all, in your opinion?
So, interestingly, there is no clause in the Indus Water Treaty which talks about how and when the treaty is going to be suspended, which means that, you know, India reneging and going back on its word and going back on its promise then becomes a serious violation of international law in any case. And I think that one of the best mechanisms available, considering that, you know, international law enforcement mechanisms are relatively softer as compared to domestic law mechanisms that we've got. But, you know, this is the kind of matter that you then take up in the Security Council with the P5, and you lobby with them simply because it's such a serious violation. It sets a very poor example for rest of the international community as well. You know, the sacredness of international treaties, of international agreements, then is not going to be preserved anymore. So I think that would be most likely. With regards to any other institution like the International Court of Justice, unfortunately, in relation to the Indus Water Treaty, there is no such provision that, you know, the ICJ would have compulsory jurisdiction. Nonetheless, this is exactly where you need to be engaging the UN's the various institutions, Security Council no less. Other than that, I would also want to say that, you know, this whole talk of nuclear arms race and talking so casually about nuclear war that is going on Indian media, and generally they are coming up with their projecting strategies, what they are going to do to Pakistan, and that they are going to launch you know, water-based war on Pakistan. That is all that only reflects criminal intent. As you know, the Indian Air Force has just tweeted right now that in the town, in the district of Shivpuri, they have unloaded and they have dropped non-explosive, they say, stocks on their own people, on their own civilians, on Indian civilians actually. So war only harms, war only leads to destruction. And right now, this whole war mongering and frenzy that the Indian media has created in tandem with the Indian government is now posing a threat and danger to Indian people themselves, which is extremely, extremely irresponsible on part of the Modi government, and they need to refrain. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has just requested to both the countries, but it's Modi who needs to pay heed to this call to show and exercise restraint, because not a single shred of evidence has been presented up till now as to any possible Pakistani involvement, as the Indian administration has alleged, with regards to the Pahalgam, you know, attack, a terrorist attack which just took place in occupied Kashmir.
Right, fair enough. IJAZ, in the ground of, you know, whether this is a diversion, which has of course cost the Kashmiri people so many lives on the part of India, call it the false flag operation overall, but the kind of Modi India that we are looking at, you know, perhaps it's also a time to sort of see, if we look back at the last tenure of the Modi-led government and this tenure, hasn't it consistently eroded you know, the treatment that is meted out to the minorities? If we look at what's happening to Muslims, and it is certainly not, you know, just relegated to Muslims, because we've seen what's happening to Christians overall, you know, all minorities, and the kind of extremism rise that we've seen all over India. And then, you know, the comments that are coming up in context to what, of course, MUNEEB was saying right now. There seems to be a stark policy of irresponsibility. And like he said, you know, that is culminating into criminal intent and criminal negligence even.
No, you see, this is a rational perspective that you are saying. From their point of view, he is doing a wonderful job to promote the Hindutva doctrine of RSS.
Of intolerance.
Of intolerance. And he wants to damage the secular image of India. And they are very categorical in their media, in their official statements, in their informal talks, that you know, what they want, what is their vision of India. It is Hindu-centric, where other minorities, they have to be, you know, they should be non-practicing, and they should not be seen, they shouldn't be heard, and if they just be a compliant second-rate citizen. It's not only restricted to Muslims or for that matter Christians. What treatment are they giving to their Sikhs? Not only in India, but they are doing the transnational terrorism against Sikhs. So
and we know what happened in Canada also.
Exactly.
So there are cases in point that are stark, and there is evidence that, you know, has
but
to
the
be
problem
looked at in
is,
context.
problem is this is happening, this is continuously happening. But what bothers me, it's not what Mr. Modi is doing, because somebody who has, you know, a mandate to follow and promote RSS agenda, he would be expected to do such brutal things. And his own personal record, as you mentioned, as a, you know, he was labeled as butcher of Gujarat. But you see, the same person who was not allowed to enter United States, now he has become the darling of the West. And unfortunately, not only the West, but certain other friendly countries, you know, who should naturally align towards Pakistan and people of Kashmir, because not because they are Muslims or they are, you know, just because it's a humanitarian crisis situation, and they are justified in their freedom struggle, which India very oftenly attributes to Pakistani support, which Pakistan again denies. Pakistan has even, you just see, within 5 minutes of this occurrence, they have concluded that this is an Pakistani attack.
Yes, and the way that they have concluded
so if
it,
their,
if
their intelligence was so strong, this incidents happened at a place which is approximately 275 kilometers away from LOC. So which,
and they had no warning of it.
they had no warning.
According to what they claim.
I mean, they had no surveillance, they had no intelligence on these people. And now all of a sudden, after they have done this attack supposedly, and within 5 minutes they have been able to establish their identity, they have been able to establish their linkages to Pakistan. And this is, but unfortunate part is that through their media, because media organically.
But the kind of vituperative content that is presented on Indian TV screen by Indian media, there seemed to be, you know, no responsibility, and there seemed to be, you know, overall disregard for what this can do as far as escalation is concerned.
Exactly. They do not realize that with such a flashpoint and two nuclear armed nations and who have a history of wars, if we just step up on the escalation ladder, it is very easy to step up, but stepping down is very difficult. And any misadventure would be, you know, nobody will be, you know, I would say a winner out of such wars.
Of course.
These would be people. And as they are mentioning about, you know, water treaty, or just look at them. It's not only Indus Water Treaty, it's the, you know, international law of, you know, water courses, or international water law, which has certain advantages or certain responsibilities to the upper riparian and lower riparian countries. And India, in her policies, on one side, once it's dealing with Pakistan or Bangladesh, it denies the rights of lower riparian countries as per the international conventions. But once it comes to China, where they are in lower riparian, and China controls the water flowing out of you know, their sources to India, she utilizes the same law to project her case internationally. So that is a stark, you know, I would say difference, hypocrisy, and they can build their narrative on anything. So that doesn't surprise me. I will, at the cost of repetition, I would say it's the international conscience. It is the, you know, international conscious, the international forums.
But Ijaz, is there, I mean, I have to say this, is there an international conscience? I think it's time to sort of reevaluate on that also. All the events all over the world seem to indicate that there really isn't, unfortunately.
In this century, we are promoting law of jungle, that might is right.
Because unfortunately all over the world, that is what is is something, you know, that is starkly in front of you. And it seems that, you know, one can't really debate where we are at this time. Where have we seen, you know, my question is, you know, let me go to Farzana before I go to Muneeb. Farzana, where in the world are we looking at international conventions, international law, you know, peacekeeping organizations having, you know, their effectiveness? Let's talk about that. Farzana? I think there's a problem. Muneeb, the same question to you. You know, where in the world? Let's see. I want to, you know, really look at a region that gives us hope that there are these checks in place. And unfortunately, to me, they don't seem any.
Unfortunately, I don't see any cause for hope, and I hope I get proven wrong on this as time unfolds. But where we're standing right now, we should all be worried because, you know, human rights abuse anywhere in the world is human rights abuse everywhere in the world. When I just look at what's going on in Sudan, for example, there's a hunger crisis. Infant mortality rate is on the rise. You go to that part of the world, and then you look at what is happening in Gaza, as I said, and then, you know, the aggression against Ukrainian civilians. There just seems to be no end to it. Or crackdown on university and campuses with regards to studying critical race theories, for example, by the American administration in the US. You know, all these things, when you add them together, somehow world leaders are setting very poor examples for other world leaders, and there's anger overall, and that is exactly the kind of anger that I'm also seeing that the Modi government in India is also trying to utilize in their vision for an Akhand Bharat. Interestingly, when I speak of Akhand Bharat, which means United India, that they think of expansionism, I was watching an interview on this channel called India Today of Mehbooba Mufti, and she was being interviewed by Rajiv Sardesai, a journalist, an Indian-based journalist, and he tried to make her condemn Pakistan without any evidence, but he just wanted her to say that she condemned Pakistan, and she did not condemn Pakistan. She actually expressed complaint as a Kashmiri that how underrepresented she feels. Similarly, Umar Abdullah, who's the chief minister of occupied Kashmir, he also criticized the Indian media, and he not once did he utter the word Pakistan in the kind of sense that the Indian media had wanted him to. That flies in the face of that Akhand Bharat narrative that, you know, Narendra Modi has been peddling, and so that is why I say that every country should be inward looking. We should be asking ourselves uncomfortable questions rather than pointing fingers at one another. Only cowardly regimes do that. And that is exactly what the Modi regime is behaving like. You know, a coward, a bully, an international pariah. And this is not the kind of behavior that we need to be putting in order. This is the kind of behavior that needs to be avoided. Diplomacy needs to be revived, if there was any diplomacy in the first place. And that is the only way that we could come to long-term solutions to our problems. And speaking of solutions, I'm listening to anchors like Anab Goswami in Indian media who are using words like final solution against Pakistan. And, you know, the references to the Nazi horrors are inescapable, unavoidable. It just brings back terrible memories of the past. And by now, our generation should have learned something from our history, which is not very practical.
Which hasn't. Unfortunately, we seem to be going back in terms of, you know, like I said, what's happening around the world with might is right ruling at this time. I want to go to Farzana. Farzana, you know what Muneeb is saying, if we look at whether we should have learned, as far as allegations against India is concerned, we look at the past, as far as 1971, you know, Ganga hijacking is concerned. We look at 2000, you know, we saw 35 Sikhs killed in Kashmir. That were initially blamed on Pakistan militants. Subsequently, investigations raised clear doubts on where the perpetrators were. We look at the 2019 Pulwama attack. These are just, you know, some of the cases where, you know, the kind of narrative that India has put forward has taken a clear beating. We look at cases like Kulbhushan Yadav. We look at what's happening in Canada as far as, you know, the interference, the blatant interference is concerned. So there is a host of you know, cases in point here, and yet we are looking at this. But as far as this whole incident is concerned, don't you think, as far as India itself is concerned, their people are concerned, in this instance they are looking at, they're being able to see through what is being put forward, the false propaganda that is being put forward?
No, I don't see that. Of the people, of the tourists who were killed in Pahalgam, there was a Muslim as well, and there was a Christian as well. These people are not mentioned. It is only the Hindus who are reacting, and it is only the Hindus who are standing up and threatening Kashmiris. And within India, wherever there are Kashmiris, they are threatening them to leave within 24 hours, to leave within a day, otherwise they will kill them. And anyways, this is what has been going on in India since BJP has been ruling India. What they've been doing is that they have been clearly abusing the minorities, and Muslims happen to be one of the biggest minorities of India. In this scenario, there has been an increase, sadly, of the RSS mentality being propagated and accepted by Indians. The civil society, which was expected, which had been rather brave, has been named. You know, people like Natasha Kaul, who's a very famous academic. He is a Kashmiri Pandit. He is not allowed to come into India. So the people, very few of them who had the courage to criticize India, the Indian government, the state-sponsored terrorism, they are being ostracized. They have cases against them, and so they are being silenced. So when the same voices are silenced,
there's no doubt about that. Thank you so much, Farzana. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for being with us. MUNEEB QADIR, thank you for joining us. AVM retired IJAZ Malik Saab, thank you for being with us today. At this time, one hopes that sanity will prevail. One hopes that India will realize that there is a direct consequence of their actions. You know, two nuclear states against each other at this time in this blatantly falsified false flag operation. There needs to be coherence in the narrative that is, of course, clearly being cooked up, and there is clear discrepancies which are being pointed out by Indian nationals themselves. It is a time for reflection as far as India is concerned. It is a time for them to consider that Pakistan as a nuclear state has the right and the ability indeed, and they are ready, and we are ready at all times to defend ourselves in all shape and form. But there needs to be a de-escalation on both sides. There needs to be a saner voices at this time for India to understand that their actions can have potential dire consequences. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.